Welcome to Tell Me More, the Allsteel podcast where design meets innovation and we explore the limitless potential of workspaces. In this exclusive series, we're peeling back the layers of workplace design. From the psychology of colors to the future of hybrid work, join us as we open doors to conversations with industry leaders, architects, and designers who redefine the modern workplace. This is Tell Me More, brought to you by Allsteel, because when it comes to designing the future, there's always more to discover.
Hello, everyone. I am Taylor Morgan, a Senior Workplace Advisory Manager for Allsteel and your host for today's Tell Me More podcast. With me, I have Christina Piper, the Vice President of Workplace for JLL Design. Christina, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. Taylor, thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited about our conversation today. I'm Christina Piper, Vice President of Workplace Design for Jones Lang LaSalle. Part of what we do is help clients all the way through the design process, from the very beginning, first programming meeting, all the way through drawings, execution of design, and then eventually talking about change management and communications.
Perfect. Thank you for being here, Christina. We're so excited to have this conversation, especially around the change management and how it relates to the workplace, which is ever evolving in today's society. So to kick it off, we know as humans, we're often resistant in change just because of the unknown. And there's a lot of speculations that come with change and the conclusions that we can make as humans without having the proper internal communication can often lead us down an area of resisting that change. So our workplaces today are constantly changing, and we love to talk about the intentional office and what that is looking like for the humans that are entering into this intentional workplace. So at Allsteel, when we think about the intentional office, we believe that we're designing spaces for a specific purpose to allow those workers to go to the office with intention and to fulfill a specific purpose for them, so that we are treating not only the work that they're doing, but also the person as a whole. So to kick it off, I would love to start by asking the question of how are our workplaces and the spaces we design today allowing for that intentional office, and what change management practices can we implement within the design process?
Well, I think, Taylor, you started the conversation right where every piece of change management exists, right? Is the sentiments of people. And ultimately, as humans, we are resistant to change, and it's in our DNA to question things, get used to things, get into our habits, right? So when we talk about something kind of scary to many people, right? Return to work policies, how many days are you going to be in the week? What types of spaces are there for you to use? If you're an individual who has specific accommodations of how you work, that might be providing some anxiety as well. So I think when we talk about the intentional office and making sure that people know it is something specifically for them, that we've specifically designed things that are going to be very intentional in nature, right? And strategic on how people can use the space. It is so important to have that thought process carved out already. It's so important to anticipate these questions that we're going to get, because as humans, the more information we get at these regular touch points, it calms us down, makes us less anxious. And the more that intentional office space is explained to the user via something like a journey map, that is something that the person can immediately start to at least feel comfortable with, start to embrace, and then mentally prepare for that as they come into the space. So when we talk about that intentional office, it is so important, like you mentioned, to work with teams, like yourself, to make sure that we're teaming together to communicate to users the specific things we've done to enhance and make that workplace a really dynamic experience for them.
Absolutely. And I think you hit on it too. I mean, it's more of a holistic approach with the policy and these, communicating what these spaces are going to be doing for the individuals and how it can, support their work style as well.
Absolutely.
So Are there specific things in, being on the design side that you and your team are doing or having conversations with your clients specifically as it relates to this? And, how are you having those conversations with the clients early on to let them know that, change management is important, that change communication is important for the overall success of the project?
You'll not be surprised to hear that still the buzzword of the year is flexibility, right? And so
Yes,
when we
yeah,
talk about flexibility, furniture can bring such a leading component to that piece, right? It really
for
can
sure.
transform a space from one function to another, the ability
Mhm.
for it to flex quickly as needed for different groups or individuals. So when we talk about how furniture can play a role in that and how that funnels into the communication stream, to workers, oftentimes we're partnering with teams like you guys to help us really develop communications related to the different changes in furniture, how that's offering flexibility, even things such as etiquette, right? When we're using
Right.
new workspaces, no one likes to go into a room where all the conference chairs are spun around in different heights. So just etiquette of please leave this like you found it. Please make sure everything's reset so that every
Mhm.
user gets to enjoy the same benefits that you did. So
Yeah.
I think it's ever so important for us to team together and generate those visuals so that clients really can understand how these solutions are very intentionally set up for them and their needs specifically. So a specific example I can think of recently, we have a client we're working with, and right now they have very large workstations. And so part of their equation is we're going to move to smaller workstations. We're going to do a 6x6 module, which is smaller than what they have, but still very sufficient for the work that they need to do in that space. And so naturally, you'd expect there's a little bit of hesitancy, curiosity of where am I going to put this or that, or how can I store this? And so part of what you're saying is being able to team together with you and look at, can we generate some three-dimensional sketches or renderings? Can we label them so that they know what amount of storage they're getting in comparison to what they have now? Different benefits that might be exciting, right? A sit-to-stand work surface, whereas they may not have that before. The ability to have an ergonomic chair. And then, of course, if it's applicable, the opportunity to actually look at how we can do something like a chair fair or a furniture mock-up to get some buy-in to make sure that they feel like they have a little bit of a voice in the conversation.
Absolutely. And you hit on this. It's, about gaining that trust, having the engagement with the teams, and then ultimately, creating that excitement as well. And I think that, we asked a little bit earlier about tools. And I think sometimes when we talk about change management, there's this idea that it has to be static and it's more of just a straight conversation. Whereas, on the design side, we do have the opportunity to bring in more of those visual aids and to really be able to walk them through the space and talk to them about how they are able to utilize all the new furniture solutions that they're going to have as
Yeah,
well. So
I think you hit on a great point.
mhm.
The message, right? And the
The
positioning of the
message, yes.
message.
Hmm.
And it's meant to calm that anxiety, right? If we can position
Right.
something with positivity, with excitement, with
Mhm. Right.
enthusiasm, with the
Hmm.
fact that leadership has bought into this and they're here to
Hmm.
support you and hold your hand on that journey, that's a
Yeah.
much different environment for someone to go into versus you're moving in on day one and figure it out yourself,
Yes.
or we're
Hmm.
not here to answer any questions, or the dreaded, well, it just is, that's what it is, so get used to
Hmm.
it, right? So it's
For
managing
sure.
that message throughout the whole journey and really
Hmm.
taking along people on that journey at multiple touch points.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you think that, leaders today, and we're seeing this, they're a lot more acceptable to the notion of, incorporating that change management and change communication within the design process. Do you see that on your side as well? And do you think that they find it more important than ever just because we are, moving into this new workplace and new work styles?
It is refreshingly evident in today's workplace design that leadership they're really listening, and I'm so happy to see them engaged even before the design process begins.
That's
I
great.
love when I can meet with executive leadership to talk about a new project, and they say to me, in addition to design, how should we start to position the message? How can we start to communicate this? How can we internally be champions for this, right? And it just makes me so excited because when you have that kind of enthusiasm from a leadership level, it
Hmm.
permeates downward.
Yeah.
And you can absolutely tell that they care, that they're invested in the outcome, and that and this is different now, that
Hmm.
they not only see that buy-in as success, but essential. And so I'm super excited, and I'm seeing this more and more when leadership is saying, you guys do this every day. Can you help us and drive this for us? And how can we partner in the quest to make sure that this is a amazing experience for
Yeah.
our workers?
Absolutely. And I think, the caring aspect, the empathy that we're seeing come into the workplace is more so than ever. And
Yes.
it's great because we want to, we've all been through this world of change since the pandemic, and now we're trying to figure out the hybrid approach and what that looks like as well, if there is any, and the new policies. And I think we want our, the employees to feel comfortable, and, we want them to know that we've heard them, and we want the environment to ultimately be successful. So that's great.
Yes. And I think to add on to that, the essential
Hmm.
piece to me is ultimately the ability to partner internally with an
Yes.
organization with their stakeholders. So part of what we implement are change advocates or champions throughout this
Yeah.
process. That allows us to work within that internal team of stakeholders to fashion different programs, different methods of testing, different methods of education, training within their organization, so they immediately start to feel comfortable. And so those champions start to mitigate any anxiety from the first touch point. I think
Yeah.
whenever you're working with a third party, such as you, Taylor, or me and
Hmm.
our team, people naturally have a respect for that authority, but they also have this disconnect of feeling like they can't answer questions or engage in
Yeah.
conversation. And so those champions that are internal stakeholders to the organization help us bridge that gap and make sure the message is always positive, one of curiosity, and one that's dynamic.
That's fantastic. And I think that's so important too, because we are in a workplace right now that has multi generations working all together. And so there are a lot of different, work
Yes.
styles. And, how is change communication, allowing for that comfortability of those multi generations all coming together and working maybe in a way that, they never did before?
Great points. Yes, we are in an age where we've got every generation working together, and we're trying to plan offices and space for a lot of different preferences, right? With you started the conversation talking about how spaces are intentional and human centric. That's never been more the case, and a really, really important aspect because we've got every kind of worker in the office with every kind of preference, every kind of working style, every kind of body type, right? And
Yep.
so we're
Right.
catering to really a lot of differences. And so
Mhm.
the ability, again, to streamline communication, make it easy to read, make it easy to understand, and make sure that people have equal opportunities for training sessions and other aspects of educating them is so
Yeah.
important to provide that equity. We also need to make sure, again, with our change champions who are driving that, that we are celebrating and including a cross section of that organization. It shouldn't just be one type of department or someone in a specific age level, junior or senior. It really needs to represent the cross section of the organization such that people feel that that group is of truly their peers, whatever peer group that may make up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think by doing that too, I mean, one, you're showing inclusivity, but you're also probably providing some clarity, and people can be a little bit more relatable to others, instead of it being just, yeah, senior or,
Yes,
high end leadership,
yes,
etc. Because it's
yes.
really hard to go with the change or to believe in the change when you've got one person, or one persona just, driving that change. So
You're totally right. It would be like if I'm working for a company and the CEO and CFO and CIO all say, we're the change management committee. What questions do
Yes.
you have? Please feel free to be transparent. I mean, would you feel comfortable? I wouldn't.
No.
I would
Yeah.
say it's
No.
all
Yes.
fun, whatever you decided. And so
Yeah.
by building this group of champions that's truly a
Mhm.
cross section, you really start to impart that equity and make sure you're creating a safe space for people to ask questions and have curiosity, or even come to you and say, this may be a silly question, but I don't understand the concept, right? And so you can
Yeah.
start to really, at a ground level, make sure everyone feels comfortable to ask those questions and really get a better understanding of the project at hand.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when we're having these conversations and when we've got these champions, out and communicating, how can we encourage them or provide them with resources that continues that kind of positivity? And kind of, if there is the negativity, how can we mitigate that and bring them back up to, this is a positive impact and this is why. We like to, as change management, always think about the why, what, and the how of the conversations and making sure that everyone's aligned on those three elements. And sometimes I think that there can be negativity, intertwined. So how can we keep that positivity alive?
Yeah, and that is really the key ingredient, right? Is that positivity. Because the moment you allow curiosity to permeate
Mhm.
into negativity, or um, we know how it can take just a few people to create and stir that negativity, and then it's contagious, right? And it's really hard to mitigate that after the fact. So it's about being proactive and really eternally positive. And
Yeah.
um, part of what we do with our change management, we call them campaigns, not really programs, but campaigns, because they a campaign imparts that it's a long lasting kind of full circle piece. So before we even start the design process, in the back of our minds, we're thinking about what aspects of this are the right time to communicate with people. What are those deliverables to make sure that we understand ultimately what will be put in front of people, and then anticipating questions. That is the key. We need to be able to, whenever we position a message, anticipate 10 to 30 questions that people will have and the answers to those questions. So, for example, if we're doing a town hall scenario where we've just finished the design concept, how it will look, and we're in the process of working on construction drawings to validate that design and build it. One of the things we'll do in a town hall is we will have a segment where we explain the change, try and upfront answer questions, and oftentimes we'll ask for questions in advance so we can properly prepare. And then we'll have an open-ended segment always, and this allows people to ask live questions. And they can do it either on video or they can enter it anonymously into the chat so they don't feel like they're on stage. But the carefulness we have to be, because usually folks that have questions will start their questions something like, rumor has it, or I've heard, or what are you going to do about this when you're taking away this, right? So there's some negativity in there, probably indirectly on their part, just out of curiosity. And so what we have to do is position very actionable items and outcomes, right? So our words need to be positive. They need to speak to the next action. So to your point, the why behind it versus just the what. And then the action going forward. So for example, if someone says to us, I heard that we are moving from larger desks to smaller desks, and then I'll have no place to put my shoes or my raincoat or my luggage, we would say to them, in fact, you are moving from a workstation this size, right? Just list facts, to a workstation this size. And some of the great benefits you're going to see are a sit to stand desk for ergonomic health, a task light to control the amount of light at your desk, panels that are acoustical in performance, so you have sound performance, and then also a place to tack up any posters, announcement photos. And then also, to your storage question, we will be including a wardrobe cabinet with plenty of space for things like boots, shoes, and coats that has been carefully measured out in relation to what you have now, right? So we're taking some negative spin on it and positioning it into facts, talking about the highlights of the workstation, and then also answering the question. And the benefit from that is you're not only answering the question, but you're highlighting other great things about the change that people may not know about that automatically reposition that into a positive spin.
Yeah, absolutely. You're being more intentional with the words and the
Absolutely.
descriptions,
Yes.
which is, part of the intentional office, which is
Yeah.
fantastic. And most of the times, when you have those conversations, address it in the way that you just described, that brings the positivity back into the
Mhm.
conversation. And I think that just as we talked about at the beginning of the podcast here, but our nature is to resist any type of
It
change.
is.
And that's, it's for someone actually who enjoys change. I always love having the conversations with those that do, have a little bit of hesitancy on it, because I do think there's a lot of positivity that can come out of change, but it's just about communicating effectively and being transparent on what that change is, what's going
Absolutely.
to happen.
And I
So,
also think
yeah.
you reminded me of a really great point too. It's important to be positive, but it's
Mhm.
also important to balance that out with the right recipe of curiosity, right? Because think about things that you were excited about, right? You had a little bit of unknown curiosity and it piqued your interest, right? Sometimes when we're
Right.
told everything that's too much information for us to process, it becomes diluted, right? And it becomes less exciting. So we do very intentionally keep things not secret, but we keep
Mhm.
certain facts kind of um, able to be discovered later in the process. So it's almost like little wrapped presents or a little Easter egg hunt
Yeah.
along the way to
Hmm.
make sure we are unfolding these nuggets at the right touch points, right? Because
Right.
we're doing something too early, too late, or not,
Hmm.
not in the right realm.
Hmm.
That is going to dispel the message a little bit and kind of quell some of that excitement. So, for example, we're very sensitive to what's going on with the company. We were working with a client once where they were having a fairly big change in their organizational leadership, and there were some pretty big changes. And we were due to make an announcement, have a town hall to talk about the design project and their relocation. And we kind of said, wait a minute, we need to step back. This new announcement is coming at a time that we didn't anticipate. This isn't the right time to unveil this. We need to be more thoughtful and intentional about when we unveil this announcement because there's going to be natural curiosity after this big change hits. And it's too much. It's going to create too much negativity, angst, and we need to thoughtfully, more strategically align this discussion. So we pivoted. And so
Yeah.
that's something that happens too with change management and communications. Sometimes you really need to roll with the punches and make sure that you are setting up that message for success in the timing of your delivery.
Yeah, absolutely. And if the timing is not right, then it's not going to be,
It's not going to
good for
happen.
anyone
Yeah,
involved. No, correct. No,
exactly.
absolutely. And so have there been, before we close out here, are there any challenges from the design side, that you've seen, or that, come about in the design process when it comes to more of that change communication? For example, is, when we're designing something very specifically for the environment, and there's not necessarily leadership buy-in, how do you have those conversations or navigate that?
Yeah, I think naturally through the design process, there is discussion, there is disagreement, there are competing opinions, and all these are healthy and good. Without it, we don't get the best project, right? So throughout the approval process, usually we have a stakeholder team who is representing the interests of the business. And even between them, they don't agree. And that is good, right? It creates some healthy conversation and also room for people to interject opinions of their stakeholders. So when we truly are deadlocked and people are not agreeing or not conceding, what we try and do is two things. We'll either factor in another option, right? If we're looking at two different ways to solve for a micro kitchen, right? Design to make sure it's more collaborative. It includes more ability to service things like catering, and then also service kind of a social hub. We will introduce another option, right? Another way of looking at it, because usually when you do that, you start to unlock different sentiments from people, and they naturally start to kind of look at each other and say, well, yeah, if we did this, or if we just did this differently, that would allow for you, Susan, to have what you want. And John, also the great point you mentioned there, to solve for that too, right? So you start to create small kind of strategic distractions that allow
Mm-hmm.
people to start to come together. The
Yeah.
second thing we do is if people aren't agreeing or not seeing something, we look kind of at ourselves and say, are we missing the message? So we'll pick up the strategic brief from the very first visioning session, and we'll refresh our memory on what did people build consensus on during this conversation, right? Let's go back to the strategic brief, which is really our North Star on this design process. And let's see how the design we're presenting or moving forward with either contradicts this, complements this, or really could be better enhanced by this intel. So once we do that and kind of resurface that document to the team, it allows everyone to reset. And usually we can kind of talk out what things are going to make the design stronger and what things should really be left behind. So those are two tactics we do. And as far as communicating that to leadership, I think a lot of leadership, they want to see their people interacting, right? I'm seeing, and this is different. Design 20 years ago, it was very leadership driven, where a few key stakeholders made the decisions, looked around the room and said, does everyone agree? And of course, everyone did. Now it's a lot more, I guess, democratic in a way. Stakeholders are assembled and they're empowered by their leadership to make decisions themselves, right, on behalf of their stakeholders. So we recently were in a visioning session and I loved this. There was a leader and he basically said, Christina, I'm going to be in and out throughout the visioning session, throughout the day. And I thought, that's really great, because then his leaders, his stakeholders are going to feel like they can speak a little bit more safely to us as a third party coming in. And then he actually stayed during the whole time. And I thought, oh, how is this going to shift the dynamic? But what he did was he didn't offer opinions the whole time. He offered support. So, and that's a huge difference, right? Because people felt safe to converse. And when we would ask a question, they would all look at him first and he would sit there like this.
Love it.
And when people came forward with ideas that would challenge the status quo or be somewhat unpopular traditionally to leadership, he spoke in and said, I support that. That's a great idea. You should keep going with that. Build momentum around that thought concept, right? And so it created this energy throughout the day that was even contagious to our team, because we thought we're really in a room full of people that are empowered by their leader to say some things that might be unpopular, but leave them up to discussion and to ultimately decide on an action from that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that. I mean, I definitely think we have, we've shifted the mindset into more of that democratic, mindset, as you mentioned. And it's great to see that leaders are now leaning on the leaders underneath them to really shape, how their environment should be and what that communication is going to be to those individuals, which is just, I think, in itself a positive impact on how we're moving forward in the workplace.
Yeah, but it validates why those people hire them, right? So
yes,
they should
very
be
much so.
Very happy to see them lead in that way.
Absolutely. Well, this has been great, Christina. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up today?
I think, Taylor, one thing I'd love to kind of toss back at you, being in the furniture world and so connected to furniture,
Sure.
Can you give us an example of, you're at that very first conversation with the design team of programming out furniture for spaces, and then you also are on the cutting edge of research. We're getting all geared up right for NeoCon and Design Days now. So what things are you seeing, or one example of something in the furniture world that specifically speaks to change management or communications?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's, as you mentioned it, I mean, it's more important than ever today. And through our research and, our trends and just the conversations we're having with A&D, with commercial real estate, and, those that are actually, going to be working within the spaces to our clients, it goes back to, they want to create an office that is one intentional. We're still struggling from the standpoint of, building our culture and then finding, what's the appropriate hybrid schedule to re-enter or to be in those spaces, and then what is going to bring them back. It's no longer the conversation around providing food on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. It's more so, how can we design that space, and from our side, from how can we provide furniture solutions that's going to allow for flexibility, collaboration, and just a more fluid environment. Because as you know, we all work a little bit differently. I mean, not necessarily where we physically are, but also, how we want to work. There might be some days where I need nothing but focus time. And, I do want to go in the office though, because I still want that social element, when I don't need to focus. But when I am there, I do need a dedicated space that allows me just to have my heads down. Or I want to go in, I want to be in the cafe. I want to be able to, sit side by side with my coworker and be able to collaborate, have organic conversations, and, maybe, bounce ideas off as well. So we're looking at furniture solutions that lend to all of that. And then making sure, though, it comes into the built environment in a more holistic way. And so we are having conversations too, around the inclusivity part of design and what that looks like. And we want to be inclusive and intentional with the work that we are doing and the built environment as we're designing it. But we don't want it to be necessarily a hodgepodge of elements. It needs to be ultimately intentional for the workers to come in and want to use it, feel safe. And then to your earlier conversation earlier, know those protocols. Know how to use a space for so long. Like, can I be in that focus room for 4 hours? What is the etiquette here? And if it's not that, then where can I go to find that? And so really, it's to the point earlier of having those human-centric conversations as well with leaders, and making sure that we're understanding everything that they're doing current state, and then where they want to go future state, and then making sure that we're providing some furniture solutions that are equivalent to their goals as well.
So glad you mentioned inclusivity. And I think that should be our shared closing thought here, is that
yes.
It is so important when we talk about building equity and inclusivity in spaces. One of the most profound things I've heard is that equity isn't always equal to everyone, right?
Yes.
Meeting rooms need to be created with equity in mind on what the focus of the meeting is, right?
Correct.
Equity in some meetings means that everyone gets a shared voice, everyone gets a shared seat, and that should structure the room differently than
Absolutely.
if it's a board of directors meeting, right? And it's one person or two people sharing data. That equity shifts, right? That equity needs to be focused on the presenters versus the audience. And so when we talk about how that relates to furniture and the change management message, this is where we start to break down the why behind the what, and build a business case, but also build a social case, a human-centric case for that change, and how we are achieving that equity within our furniture solutions and ultimately within our design.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. And on that note, I want to thank you so much. Your expertise is always valued, and your time as well. And this has just been a great conversation, Christina. So thanks
you so much for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation.
And that brings us to the end of another fascinating episode of Tell Me More. We hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the world of design and innovation. If you're hungry for more insights and stories, make sure to subscribe to Tell Me More on your preferred podcast platform. As we sign off, remember that the conversation doesn't end here. Connect with us on social media at Allsteel and share your thoughts, questions, or even your favorite moments from the podcast. We love hearing from our engaged and curious audience. Stay tuned for our next episode, where we'll continue exploring the Design to Do More philosophy. Until then, thanks for listening.